Hey guys, so today we're going to be looking at the Motorola Moto G 2014 edition, which is the second version of the Moto G. I'm going to look at a lot of aspects of the Moto G and share my thoughts as I've been carrying it as my main phone for the past 5 days. Hope you enjoy. The Motorola Moto G was originally a great success around the world, and it is what brought Motorola's name back into the marketplace. So now they have made the second edition, and this version improves and tweaks the first one, not by a lot, but just enough to make it a great phone, especially for the price of 179 US dollars. So right off the bat you can see that it has front-facing stereo speakers and that it is much bigger than the original. This one has a 5-inch 720p display, a Snapdragon 400 quad-core processor at 1.2 GHz, 1 gig of RAM, and a 2070 milliamp hour battery. And you can see here the charger is kind of interesting because it doesn't actually detach from the cable. So you're getting a 550 milliamp charger, but you can't use the cable separately. So if you want to transfer anything to the phone, you either need a separate cable that you already have or you need to go out and purchase one. It's time to hear that snap. I guess there wasn't one. It's actually a much thinner plastic sheet than what's normally used. So this is the phone, the Motorola Moto G 2014 edition, and this next to it is the Moto X 2013 edition. And as you can see, the Moto G is much bigger than the old Moto X. So here's the Moto G on top and the Moto X on bottom, and you can see that very similar materials are used, very similar design language is used, and they look very, very similar. Just one is bigger. Great construction. The Moto G feels great. It is a little hollow. It doesn't have that dense feeling that the Moto X has, but it still feels great in the hand and when typing. To remove the back cover, you have to pop it off. It's kind of a horrible sound to hear, but it's not too hard to get off. You just gotta have some nails and it easily comes off. So as you can see here, there's two SIM holes, but one is actually blocked. So that is for, I guess, a dual SIM version that would be released somewhere else. And there's a micro SD slot on top. I have put a 32 gig class 10 SanDisk card and it was working flawlessly. And I was really surprised by the performance of this phone, which we'll talk about in a bit. So this is the boot screen. It's the same as before. I like that they use white in the background, not black, because it is an LCD panel. So it does look great when booting up. Alright, so it's finally set up and ready to be tested. This is actually after several days of testing. The phone is still speedy, fast, smooth, runs great, and I was very, very surprised by its amazing performance. This phone definitely is worth more than what it costs, and it performs faster than some of the flagship phones. As you can look around on YouTube, you'll see some videos comparing its smoothness to some of the flagships. So we're gonna start by running a Sun Spider test. Don't expect it to be too fast. Alright, so it got 1500 milliseconds. Now that is not the best, but for Snapdragon 400 at 1.2 gigahertz, I mean, you can't expect much more. The browsing experience is smooth though. It's not laggy by any means. The whole phone experience is very smooth and surprisingly enjoyable to use. It's not as fast as using the Moto X, but for a much cheaper chipset, it is running very well. So as you can see here, it is pretty smooth running a long site with a lot of images like that. Pinch to zoom runs really well. Wasn't for some reason zooming back out, maybe because it's a mobile site, but you can see it's running fine. Loading an image in the browser also worked very smoothly. Pinch to zoom, very smooth. Everything so smooth in this phone. This is actually a picture I took with the Moto G, and it's 8 megapixel camera. Surprisingly well. We'll get to that soon. Call quality is excellent and much better than something like the OnePlus One. I could hear very well, and talking on the phone was a pleasure. As you can see, it handles multitasking pretty well, and switching between apps is actually a very fast experience. So many times I would be chatting on WhatsApp, and I would want to go into Spotify, go into Chrome, into the dialer, back, camera, back, and it would just do everything without lag, and it was running very, very well. Sometimes even better than the Moto X would, which surprised me. Maybe it's a software thing, but it is very stable and ran very, very well. If you want an idea for how this phone performs, it is very, very similar to how a Nexus 4 runs. So everything is smooth, everything is great. It's not as snappy as using a Snapdragon 801, but everything runs decently well. In terms of performance here, you can see. So as you can see, in N22 benchmark, it got a 17732, which is less than the Nexus 4, and that is because it is slightly lower clocked at 1.2 gigahertz, and the Nexus 4 was 1.5 gigahertz. But in day-to-day usage, you really can't tell the difference. And I guess that's what helps this get better battery life than what the Nexus 4 used to get. Next, we're going to run 3D Mark and see how that comes out. So I got 5,625. It's a decent score, nothing to brag about. So on Quadrant, I got roughly 9,000, and Quadrant isn't a really good benchmark to use, but I mean, it's something that we've been using for a long time, so it shows you that the CPU is much faster than the Tegra 3 on the HTC One X, but it doesn't really say much else. Next, we're going to look at battery life, and battery life has been pretty solid. It gets me through a day of full use, no holding back on anything, streaming music on Spotify, messaging, Netflix. Usually gets me around 18 to 20 hours with 3.5 hours of screen time. So, I mean, you can't really expect much more from a phone at this cost. You can see my usage is really scattered, and the phone is awake for a lot of the time, but it still gets you through a day, so that's all that matters. Next, we're gonna do a quick look at the stereo speakers and audio output, but if you want to see that more in depth, feel free to click the link on the bottom as I do a very in-depth comparison of the speakers. So the stereo speakers are not the best sounding, but because they are in a stereo configuration, when you're holding the phone in landscape, it sounds pretty immersive. So I really appreciate them for doing that. Next, we're going to look at the camera, which is surprisingly good. And click below for a lengthy comparison, where I compare it to the Moto X and the OnePlus One, and look at different photo scenarios and video scenarios. So, as you can see here, except for this shot, I mean, the camera is surprisingly good. And for a budget device, to have an 8 megapixel camera that can take low light shots such as these, and daylight macros as the flowers you saw before, it's really impressive. This is the front cam, which is also pretty good. Sunlight legibility is top notch. The LCD looks great when outdoors. The blacks get really deep, so I love when you're in a shaded area and the brightness is still high, but then you don't get the horrible contrast that you would get indoors. So as you can see here in the sun, it does look great. Overall, the Moto X of last year needs to step aside because the Moto G is a pleasure to use, and I actually enjoyed it more than the Moto X overall. I do miss the snappiness of the Moto X, but using this as a phone, as a daily driver, was a pleasure to use. It wasn't anything horrible. The only bad thing is when it's sitting on a table like the HTC One and you try to type, it does have that flimsiness. But what's good about this flimsiness is you can spin the phone, and in certain situations, spinning the phone is a lot of fun. So hopefully I'll put up a video about the differences between Dalvik and Art on this device. And that's pretty much it. It is worth it, and it is a great device to use. And if you were thinking about it or waiting for any reason, you should just get it. Alright, that's it. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and have fun as always, guys. Thank you. Take care.